Type 1, the grandiose narcissist. This is the one most people picture when they hear the word narcissist. They walk into a room and immediately start working it. They talk about themselves, their achievements, their connections, their potential, and they're magnetic. That's the part people forget. Grandiose narcissists are often genuinely charming, at least at first. The problem shows up the moment they don't get what they feel they deserve. The waiter brings the wrong dish. A colleague gets the credit they wanted. You cancel plans. Watch what happens. The entitlement surfaces fast. And underneath all of it, underneath the confidence and the name-dropping and the need to be seen, is a self-image so fragile it requires constant outside confirmation just to stay standing.
Type 2, the covert narcissist. This is the one that confuses people the most because they don't look like a narcissist. They don't brag, they don't dominate conversations, they seem wounded, sensitive, overlooked, and you feel for them. You start spending more energy trying to make them feel okay. You walk on eggshells, not because they yell, but because their silence has weight. Because a certain look can ruin your whole evening. Covert narcissists are masters of making you feel responsible for their pain without ever saying it directly. And the damage they cause takes longer to see because it looks like love. It looks like you caring for someone fragile. It's only later, when you're exhausted and smaller than you used to be, that you start to understand what was actually happening. Type 3, the malignant narcissist. This is where narcissism stops being a personality quirk and becomes something darker. The malignant narcissist doesn't just want to be admired, they want to win. And winning means someone else loses. They use fear, manipulation, and sometimes outright cruelty, not impulsively, but deliberately. They know exactly what they're doing. There's a calculated quality to it. If they ruin your reputation, it's not because they lost their temper. It's because you became a threat or an obstacle, or simply because they could. The thing that makes this type so hard to deal with is the lack of remorse. Not reduced remorse, not hidden remorse. None. The suffering of others doesn't register as a cost. Type 4, the communal narcissist. This one is particularly hard to spot because on the surface they seem like one of the good ones. They're always helping, always volunteering, always the first to show up when something goes wrong, and they make sure you know it. The communal narcissist doesn't get their supply from being powerful or feared. They get it from being seen as the most giving, the most sacrificing, the most moral person in the room. The problem is what happens when you don't acknowledge it enough, or when someone else gets the credit. Suddenly, the warmth disappears, the resentment surfaces, and you realize the giving was never really free. Type 5, the vulnerable narcissist. If you've ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were constantly managing someone's emotional state, where a small comment could trigger a shutdown that lasted for days, this might be who you were dealing with. The vulnerable narcissist oscillates. There are periods where they're warm, exciting, almost magnetic, and then something shifts, a perceived slight, a moment of not feeling special enough, and the collapse is total. They don't rage the way a grandiose narcissist might. They implode, and somehow you end up apologizing, even when you're not sure what you did wrong. Living with this type means your emotional needs slowly get pushed to the margins because their emotional emergencies always feel more urgent. Type 6, the somatic narcissist. Their supply comes from the body, how they look, who they attract, how many people want them. The somatic narcissist treats physical appearance not just as something they value, but as proof of their inherent superiority. They spend an unusual amount of time and energy on their looks, not because it makes them happy, but because it feeds something. Relationships with this type often follow a pattern: intense physical attraction at first, followed by a growing sense that you are mostly an accessory, something that makes them look good or feel desired. When you age or get sick or simply stop providing the reflection they need, the interest fades, sometimes very suddenly. Type 7, the cerebral narcissist. They don't need to be the best-looking person in the room. They need to be the smartest, and they will find a way to demonstrate it in meetings, at dinner parties, in casual conversations about things that don't matter. The cerebral narcissist weaponizes knowledge, not to teach, not to connect, but to position, to establish that they see things others miss, understand things others can't, and that your perspective, while sweet, is a little beneath them. Over time, this erodes something in you. You start second-guessing your own observations. You hesitate before speaking. You begin to feel intellectually small in a way you never did before you met them. Finally, type 8, the spiritual narcissist. This one can be the hardest to name, because how do you criticize someone for being spiritual? They've done the work, they've healed, they've transcended, and they need you to know it. The spiritual narcissist uses the language of growth and awakening as armor. When you're upset, you're told you're operating from ego. When you raise a concern, you're not vibrating at the right frequency. When you try to hold them accountable, they respond with a kind of serene detachment that makes you feel like the problem. Spirituality for them isn't a path, it's a hierarchy, and they're at the top. Now you know the types. And maybe for the first time, things are starting to make sense. Why it felt so confusing, why it was so easy to get pulled in, why you kept doubting yourself instead of them. It was never random. Each one of these types has a way of making you feel like the problem. But you weren't the problem. You just didn't have the map. Now you do. So tell me, which one of these types have you dealt with or are you dealing with right now? Drop it in the comments. You might think your story is just yours, but someone scrolling through those comments right now needs to read exactly what you went through. Let them know they're not alone.